Welcome back to the channel. I made a new website and it's really fancy and it's using all the newest technologies and it's using JAMstack and it's a PWA. There's a lot of stuff. And it actually didn't take me that much time to build it. And I just released it and people have been asking, Tim, but how did you do it? You know, can you give us a code walkthrough? Can you actually show some stuff for once rather than just talk to us? So yes, let's do it. Let's have a look at the website. So currently this is hosted at Netlify at the CDN edge, which means there is no central origin server where the files are hosted that the CDN looks at. It's literally static, a bunch of static files. This is like a 4 megabyte website or something that is deployed on the CDN closest to you and then all around the world. So it's really not hackable because there's basically nothing to hack. All the files are static. So this is really cool about JAMstack, and also cool that Netlify gives you this for free. It's just amazing. The tools nowadays, man. So basically this website shows my speaking schedule, it shows my writing as a blog, and it shows my video, which are kind of blog posts also, but videos. So speaking, you can see it has upcoming talks and older talks, and the talks just come from the CMS. Then we have writing, which is similar. It just shows you the dates and a bunch of information about the talk. About writing, and you can click on it and go, and you see images are lazy loaded and made in fancy, and you see that performance, right? That's pretty crazy. It's near instant. I was actually thinking of maybe adding some page transitions to make it feel less fast, because people are not used to websites this fast. But then I thought, fuck it, we'll just show you fast. This is what it can be. Any website can be this fast. And then videos, which is a grid of videos, and you can actually filter. People with a keen eye can probably see it's not a real filter because I don't have that much content. So the moment you click twice, normally you would see no result very fast. I don't really like that. So I use the trick that a lot of e-commerces actually use is there's not that much content. Actually, that filter first filters and then it expands again with all the videos that have both tags. Or if something has just tag and tag and the other one has just quarantine links, I'll show both. So that's a little trick. The rest of the website, it speaks for itself. It's responsive, it's mobile first. I might not show you that now because that's not nice for a video format. It has PWA features. It has a whole bunch of stuff that we'll go over later on. So that's it for the website. Let's talk CMS. So I am using Prismic. Prismic is a software as a service kind of CMS, and it's truly headless. So it doesn't have an opinion on what you do with your front end. It just works, data, structure, that's it. So Prismic has a bunch of features that I think make them the winner in my book. Right? Of course, there's a lot of CMSs out there, but for the ones that I've seen and that meet my needs, this one is by far the best. And starting off is actually the fact it's free for one user and you get the full suite of features. Maybe one or two things you don't get and multiple users you also don't get. But actually it works super well with the stuff that you do get. So that's a big win. Every startup should do this. Because if people like me get to use it and like it, they can then pitch it to big clients and suddenly you can get the ball rolling, right? Everybody wants to get to that corporate level, but they never reach it. If you just have developers, give them the option to try, it will grow, right? So well done, guys. This is great. Next to that, there's a bunch of other features, right? So the first thing that I really enjoy, that I generally only see in enterprise level software, is they do components really well. They do in their data structure, they have something called slices. So a slice is like a component on a page. So it can be a quote, some media embed, a carousel, whatever. So if you define all those slices, you can basically, as a content editor, grab your page and just drag stuff in and compose your page. So it's not so fixed, it's kind of loose, and that works really well. And then the thing is, you don't have to use that. You can also just use the rich text editor that's super feature rich. So let's have a look at that. So let's go to my latest blog post, and you can see there's a bunch of fields here, and in my type definition I say I need those fields. And actually this is the rich text editor, so we were talking about that one. Basically, normally rich text editors are complete crap. Sorry for the words, but they're ridiculously bad, because content editors just work like it's Word, right? You add bold, add an extra enter, blah blah blah. What comes out on the other side for the developer is pure rubbish. You know, it's like span with a p tag inside, with inline styling, with another div, and like font tags. I've seen the most crazy shit in my time. Rich text editors equal bad stuff for developers. This one doesn't. This one is great. It actually works. So they have solved the rich text issue as a CMS vendor. This is the first time I have seen this. So what they do to solve it is that whatever you see here, like I have a paragraph, I have another like little paragraph here, I have an image, I have a title, all of this is represented in JSON. So they parse whatever is in here and represent it as JSON to your front end, so you can loop over that and then build your own HTML exactly to the content, and it gives all information, right? So it says this is heading 3, this is the title, there's a link, it displays in this paragraph. And that just solves all these low quality issues that rich text editors normally give. Of course, not everybody wants to code an interpreter for this and write its own HTML. So they have created a bunch of components that you can use from them that just render this out of the box. So I actually have a rich text, Prismic rich text component in Vue.js. You give it the field name and it will just render HTML for you. And then you can actually inject your own HTML serializer if you want to change the header 3 to a header 4 if you wanted that, or whatever. We'll look at that later, but that's a super cool thing that they offer. And lastly, because there's so many features we could talk about, but that video would be way too long. So last thing that I really enjoy is that their REST API, of course that's the heart of their business, right? It has to be good, and this one is truly good. Well documented, it's fast, it's secure, it has the right things in place. And on top of that, they have a GraphQL API that works just as well. I have actually not seen a headless CMS with the proper data modeling with fast APIs that also gives you a GraphQL API that just works. Congrats guys, this is the first time I've seen it, and there might be others out there, but the stars aligned and I found Prismic, and yes, awesome. One last sentence on something they offer. They actually give you an Image IX license. And this is, Image IX is one of those services that optimize your images for you, and you can resize them and they serve them from their CDN. This is a great thing because now the CMS doesn't have to do it. Because the CMS is not an image manager, right? So they actually pay you a license for every user. Also, awesome. There are not many CMSs that actually deal with media this well. So we spoke very shortly about Prismic. Let's now run and talk about Gridsome and then look at some code. Alrighty then, let's talk about Gridsome. So basically, let me scroll up. Gridsome is a Vue.js framework that basically works for static websites. So it grabs data, dynamic or local, does fancy stuff with it, and outputs a static website. So in that sense, you can also say, hey Tim, why didn't you use Nuxt? Well, I did before. The only difference to Gridsome is that it's more scoped. With Nuxt, you can do enterprise level, full-on Node.js applications, universal mode, the whole shebang. Gridsome chose to scope it down more towards the JAMstack side of things, right? So on build level, it always does all the building and then a website pops out that's totally static. So the fact that they scoped it down and put in a whole bunch of like basic defaults that are super smart helps you accelerate the build of your website, right? I know how to do all those fancy PWA things, data chaining, caching, or whatever, all the fancy words. I know how to do those things. But what if I didn't have to do those things and actually Gridsome did them for me, so I can focus on actual writing of content and a proper design of my website, right? It basically saved me months of work that I didn't have to do myself, right? And of course, some stuff I didn't like so much, so I changed it up a little bit. Like I didn't like the way they do images, so I did my own. But most of it is great. So basically this is what they do. So you bring your data, as they say. So it can be a CMS, it can be some data API or whatever you have, CSV, JSON, or local markdown files like using Netlify CMS or just typing the markdown files on your PC. They then map that with source plugins for each source to a data model that they use. Right, so that data model is now always the same. You query it always the same way, and the source plugins to the different sources actually deal with the complexity of what that data, how that morphs and how it maps. But actually you as a developer, once you have that plugin in there, you don't have to do that much. Right, it creates collections of pages for you. It's really cool. And then once you hit build, it will actually go to use the APIs of those sources. For each page, query what it needs, renders the page, saves it. So the output is actually pre-rendered HTML. So we're kind of back to the old school where everything is just static. Now they render that static package and put a whole bunch of smart defaults on it. So it has like, yeah, let's read, you know, like there's link prefetching, there's code splitting, there is like all of those extra things that you want in your PWA website, right, to make it super fast. They do it for you, and if you don't like it, you tweak it slightly and you're good to go. And then you upload it to Netlify or Site or whatever it's called now, and all is good. Right, so yeah, they have a bunch of fun stuff here, which is all the same for a lot of systems. I kind of enjoyed the way it works, especially because of those queries. And those queries are all in GraphQL. And GraphQL querying is pretty simple. Once you get it, it's super simple. And you don't have to worry about the Vue Apollo integration and all of that complexity. They basically abstracted shit away from you, and you basically just add this to your Vue page query or static query, as we'll see later. And it just queries. Done. Very simple. So that's Gridsome in a nutshell. Of course, it does a whole bunch of stuff, but why don't we just look at the code to see how it all connects and what I had to do to make it work with Prismic, because it wasn't really out of the box. And then I'll show you the plugins I use and how everything is set up. Yeah, let's do it. All right, are you ready for some code? I am. So in the interest of not making this video 2 hours long, I'll just go over the core concepts and some of the minor issues I found in the connection between Prismic and Gridsome. I'll go over those, and then I'll show you a bit of the plugins that I use to actually make my website perform the way it does. If you have any specific questions on how certain things work or how I did something, please reach me on Twitter at TimBenix, and I will either give you a call or we just do a screen share or whatever, right? So I'm always happy to explain what I've done. Or I'm also happy for you to give me feedback because I did something really badly. Please, in any case, tell me, right? I'm Dutch, I can take it. So Gridsome is kind of abstracted away generally. It's all in their CLI package. You don't have to worry about it. But it gives you a bunch of hooks into the packages, right? So you get something called a Gridsome config and a Gridsome server file. The config file is where it all starts. Basically, it exports the site name, the site URL, the icon, and all its plugins. And I have some helper code here we'll go into later. So basically, before you can actually show anything on the page, you need to get information from your third-party source or your local markdown files. For that, you have a source plugin. So this is how Gridsome does it. They have plugins to grab data, model it for you, and add it to the local Gridsome GraphQL interface. This is super nice because your local queries that you do in Gridsome components are always the same. It's using GraphQL, and it just works really cleanly. It's very nice. So the complicated stuff happens in those plugins, so you don't have to worry about it. Unless, of course, you do millions of queries and shit goes slow, you might have to tweak it, but in most cases, no. So I went to gridsome.com, found this Prismic plugin. It almost works. Almost. I hacked it a bit, it works now. I'll show you what I did later. So basically, you add the Gridsome source plugin, you add a bit of credentials, and suddenly shit starts working. I'll show you. So when you start up Prismic, you get a local host where everything works. You also get an Explorer, which is basically a playground of GraphQL. So now you can actually see this is the local documentation generation of Gridsome. So it creates a page, it creates all pages, it creates metadata, and now there's my Prismic stuff. So there's a whole bunch of Prismic, and here there's actually home. So in my home I have a main title, subtitle, description, image, body, blah blah blah. We saw all that before in the video, right? They also have a whole schema of everything. So they ingest this, like the moment you do npm run develop or npm run build, it creates this schema for you and those docs for you, and you have all the data you need. So now when you type this very simple query, you just get the information of my homepage. It says, hi there, I'm Tim Bennix, which is this. So this just came from Prismic and it just works. And then the beauty is when I do control space or command space on your Mac, it actually auto-completes this for you. And of course it does, because it knows the whole schema. It knows everything already because it did, and it grabbed all that information when you started running the application. So now there's my header too. Now I can do, well, whatever I want, right? Oh, well, if I query for body, I have to do other stuff. Sorry, that was too premature. Whatever, we don't have to go there now, but basically you get the information. And so let's move to the next basic step, then I'll show you how can you use this information in your pages. So basically what they do is they have a pages folder, and inside your pages folder, whatever file you put there, that becomes automatically a root. So when you go to /writings, here you have writings.view, /writings is now the root that displays this stuff. Index for home, right? So basically, how do I now get my data into this page? So what they give you is they give you a really nice query object or property, or however you want to call this. Like this is a view file, right? So in view files you always have templates, you have scripts, you have some style stuff, but now they created for you page query or static query, something else. You have both of them. For pages you generally do this, for static it's for other stuff. So what is super nice about this is you don't have to worry about Vue Apollo and the Apollo server and how all this GraphQL stuff works. It kind of just abstracts it away from you because of this little component here. You can literally say, this is my query. I namespace it to Prismic and I ask for home. That's pretty simple, right? So suddenly, this is what we just saw right before. And that body thing, it actually needs a bit more. This was just my mistake for typing it that way. But it gives you all that information, and it gives you a $page property. And so when I want to show something, I have $page Prismic, which is this, home, which is this, and then description, which is that. Isn't that easy? And suddenly, here's all my data. I can actually do, if I wanted to, let's do something nasty. Let's do something. And then we do page.prismic.home. Let's have a look. Beam, that's all my data. There you go. Cool, right? That's very easy, isn't it? And from there you can do whatever the hell you want. Of course, now that we have Prismic, their description field is rich text in my case. So it outputs a JSON of all the data that I have. So I have to do something special to show that HTML. So here you have the Prismic rich text component that you just give the field of description. It gets that whole JSON stuff and it actually morphs it into HTML for me and shows me. So that's really easy. But a bit more on that later, because we have a bunch of other basics we haven't discussed. So next, so this page is on its own, right? But actually you need some sort of layout around it. So you can actually have your layout here. So layout is a component that they inject for you by default. And when you start, so you have a main.js and they actually add the default layout by default to Vue.js for you. I have a whole bunch of stuff here. That's just because I made my own Prismic code, my own Prismic components to render stuff the way I want it. You don't have to do this. I'm just an extreme nerd and I wanted to find out how it worked. You don't have to do all of that. I also use a store, so you add it here. I add a bunch of components here, and you can add some metadata to your head also in main.js. But what we learned from this is it gives you a layout. So when you go to the default layout, In my case, I just put a div class wrapper around it. I have a skip link, and then there's a slot, and that slot is where your index.view or your writings.view or videos.view is injected. So your page is injected in the slot. This stuff is always around it. You can add some styling, whatever you want. So now we have done pages, we have done layout, we have done the page query thing of how you get your data. Now there's one thing we haven't discussed just yet, which is what if I have a blog page? I don't want to have one file for each blog post, right? That's shitty. You want some sort of dynamic routing going on, because when I now click, let's say on write, right? So these are my writings, and I click on this one. This is now a dynamic slug. When I click on this one, I kind of want to have the same writing.view file that just grabs the data for that slug, right? That's how that should work. So they came up with something called templates. So now when you go to writing.view, this is kind of similar to what we saw before. There's my rich text, and it's a writing content, and I have a writing title. And actually, what you get to do now is query writing. So, but you make a query now, it's slightly different. And that UID, that's actually the slug in my case. It's the UID inside Prismic. I made it my slug, that's my URL. So that's now dynamically added from this. So this is now injected there, and then I can do my query and it all works. So that's the way you do dynamic stuff. But with Prismic, for me, this didn't work, and I lost like half a day on it. It's like, do I just not understand Gridsome? What's happening here? Why can I not just query this? As it turns out, Gridsome, I'm using those words so often, I'm moving it around. So the moment it starts up, it actually looks at the schema of the GraphQL thing you gave it, and it makes collections. So it makes the all pages, right? And so all pages or all writings or all videos, it's this stuff. This is like a GraphQL type of namespacing thing that you use, or naming convention. As it turns out, it didn't actually add the stuff you need to the context of the local Gridsome. I won't go into that too much now because that's a long story. As it turns out, I couldn't actually query this way. Where is my template for writing? I couldn't do this because it did not know about this UID locally. So I had to somehow add that, because it could find all the pages. It just couldn't find it in a dynamic way because the GraphQL schema in my local Gridsome didn't know about that field. So what I had to do, and that's where this server file comes in, because we have looked at that file but we didn't touch it yet. In this server file, it's actually very interesting because you can actually custom load extra sources, or you can basically, once it creates the pages and stuff, you can actually get a hook into that function, right? So there's a bunch more functions here that I'm not using right now. I added some quick content to the basic metadata GraphQL part. But what I had to do, and I had a lot of help from my mates for this, is actually on create pages, query for me all the writings, query for me all the videos, and only grab that UID variable that we need. And then once it has that, loop over all of them and actually create a page inside the context of Gridsome for me. So in that page, you say the path is, this is the URL. This is the component that you have to use. And in the context, say, this is my UID. And because I've done this, I can now query this in my writings.view. That was just a thing. I just didn't understand Gridsome. I didn't understand why the plugin I used didn't do it. Maybe nobody needed it when they built it. I had to figure this out. Now that I have, everything works like a charm. So we are now about 12 minutes in on the code part of things. That's pretty long, right? So how about I show you a bit of the magic of Prismic and their front-end components, one, and after that we look at the plugins that we have to make this website work really well. So first of all, what Prismic gives you, and I have to look for it, they give you something called an HTML serializer, and this is like pretty cool stuff. I can also use it to solve my issues because, for example, I want to lazy load everything. But when you add a YouTube video to an embed in Prismic, it just makes an iframe with a source. So when that loads, it loads immediately and your page might be slow. So what I did is like this HTML serializer you can plug into their components. And then when you hit something called, let's say, elements.embed, and when the element oembed provider name is YouTube, it's like, hey, now I'm rendering, hey, I see YouTube. And then what I do is I overrule what Prismic would normally do for YouTube, and I make my own iframe. So I give it an aspect ratio with a padding hack, stuff like that. And I say data SRC rather than SRC. Because I don't want it to load if I don't want to look at it yet, because I might want to scroll down and then look at it, right? Your page has to be fast. So I wrote a little bit of JavaScript in a mix-in that loads on the writing page and on the videos page. That's when it finds an iframe with a data source, at the moment of intersecting with intersection observer, it removes the data and it just puts source and YouTube loads. So that HTML serializer thing from Prismic saved my ass, because without that, I wasn't able to lazy load my embeds. Well, there are workarounds with slices in Prismic and do a completely custom thing, but I just wanted to write, embed, and write in my rich text, nothing else, keep it simple. Same goes for when I have a heading 3. Like in my case, I want a fancy title, and a fancy title is, let me find one for you. A fancy title is this. You see, it's like red and it has a little bit of a skew. There's some fun stuff. And this is a header 4, this is a header 3. Out of the box from Gridsome, from Prismic, I just get header 3. But what I want, the header 3 has to be a fancy title and it has to be red. And 4 has to be blue. And so only for writings, for blog posts, I do this. So I basically replace whatever HTML they would do with mine. And so this makes it super flexible, so you can do any sort of HTML you want. And it also saved me, and this is the last thing I want to talk about because the video is getting a bit long. Actually, it is about links. Because of course, when you link to a document inside your own website, you want that to be a router link rather than a page refresh, because a router link might be way faster. There's like no loading or some fancy animation, whatever you want. But this thing, the HTML serializer, happens after Vue.js was already loaded. So basically what you want to do, if it's a document, you kind of want to have Gridsome link or Nuxt link there, right? So it's a router link component from your framework. Doesn't work because this happens after Vue.js was rendered. So what I had to do to solve this, which is kind of a common problem, like I know there are some fixes for this, but I don't want to change Gridsome, right? That's not something you want to do. So I added this property here. So if it's a document, I tell it it's a data internal link. And then I have a little mix-in. There it is, link mix-in, which finds all internal links, adds a click handler to it. And the moment I click, I actually do router push. So I've kind of hacked it. So now links that are internal always do a router call. Without that HTML serializer, I don't think I could have fixed that. So that again, they kind of work together. It's really cool. So that's it for the stuff I want to show because there's just too much. Oh yes, I forgot one thing. Let's go. We actually haven't talked about my plugins. So plugins are everything, right, in Gridsome. So I have Google Analytics. At my ID, everything works. It just looks at your router. Whatever URL is there, it sends. You can do some event binding also, of course, but I didn't care for that. Then I wanted the sitemap XML. I add the thing, done. I wanted PWA. I add this stuff, done. I wanted to use purge CSS because I might have CSS that's not used on a certain page. Put it in like that. I literally don't configure it. Works. One last thing that I also wanted is to actually have this component, the style resources loader. So in Sass, I might have variables, right? But in my Vue components, I want to use those variables in my scoped CSS. But I don't want to include the mix-ins and the variables every component. That makes no sense. It's shitty. So the style resources loader actually does that for you. So in this config, you can actually extend Webpack and add a rule to actually load the style resource functionality for those file types. And beam, it worked. So if you want an RSS feed or you want whatever, you add a plugin, works. This is just cool, right? So I didn't have to build all that myself, it was there. So sorry this was long, but if you're stuck around, great, thanks very much. So that was it. I hope you've learned something today. As you can see, it's not that hard. We're kind of dropping back to the 90s to do static websites again, but with fancy modern technology that is hyper performance, super secure, and pretty awesome, especially because all of the tools I used are free. And of course, when you want to do enterprise level or other stuff, it's getting more expensive, but actually anyone can do this. If you have a bit of knowledge of front-end frameworks and a kind of like, what does the cloud do? This is actually a really viable option for all of us out there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.